So I'm a PhD student working with Mike Lesher and Michel Houlet mostly on the Cape Smith Belt in northern Quebec. So this talk, it's a fairly ambitious title, the Petrogenisis and Metallogenesis of mafic and ultramafic rocks in this belt. So I can't go into too much detail, but I'll give a quick run through of the main lithologies, geometries of the different sulfide hosting bodies, and we'll talk a little bit about the lithogeochemistry and the sulfide chemistry. So this project has received a lot of financial support through the TGI program with the GSC, and also support through Glencore Raglan Mine and Canadian royalties. So like I said, we'll be focusing on the Cape Smith Belt, which is located in northern Quebec. Get the laser pointer on here to the northeast of this map. And the Cape Smith Belt is just one segment of the Circumsuperior Large Igneous Province, which includes the Labrador Trough, Fox River Belt, Thompson Nickel Belt, and other segments. On this map, the stippled areas, that indicates Phanerozoic cover. So the Cape Smith Belt offers a great area to really see what this stratigraphic succession is and to study these mafic and ultramafic bodies that host significant sulfide mineralization. So here we are on the Cape Smith, and we'll be looking at the southern domain, which is indicated in green here. And you'll see that within the southern domain, these magnetic highs correlate with the ore hosting bodies. So my study area includes a couple main trends. So in the south, so closer to the bottom of the stratigraphic sequence, is the Expo trend, which includes deposits like Expo Ungava, Mesamax, and Mekeon. In the north, farther up the volcano-sedimentary sequence, is the Raglan trend, which includes deposits like Catnip, Mines 2 and 3, Kikialik, and Zone 5-8. So just briefly, this volcano-sedimentary sequence starts conformably on the Archean basement to the south, with more of a passive margin sedimentary units, and it grades up through a thick sequence of Povungnatuk basalts, which are more tholeiitic. Those basalts are overlain by a sedimentary succession of sulfidic argillites and minor conglomerates called the Nuvelic Formation. And within the Nuvelic Formation, and right at its top, are these ultramafic and mafic bodies, which host the mineralization of the Raglan trend. Above that, in the uppermost portion of the stratigraphy, is the Chukotak group, which goes from olivine ferric basalts at its base up through pyroxene, diplagiclase ferric, more tholeiitic basalts near its top. So some of the problems that we're looking at in this project include questions about the relationships between dikes and sills in the lower parts of the sequence and sills and lava channels in the upper parts of the sequence. So some of these bodies have poorly constrained geometries, and their mineral potential is relatively poorly understood. And we're also wondering where, how, and why the sulfide mineralization is located in the entire plumbing system. So a few key tools that we are using to understand this include precise ages of these units, understanding the plumbing system architecture, the geometry and morphology of these bodies, as well as a better understanding of the overall stratigraphy and structure. We're utilizing a lot of whole rock lithogeochemistry, some mineral chemistry, and also the sulfide or ore compositions. So first, let's take a quick look at the ages. These are pretty straightforward to understand. So for the sake of our talk, the key units that have been dated include hanging wall and footwall gabbros near the Catnip deposit. So this constrains the age of the main raglan horizon, as well as a differentiated gabbroic, as well as a gabbro, which is part of a differentiated sill, which is located stratigraphically right below most of the ultramafic bodies that host the sulfide ores. And then to the south, along the expo trend, taxitic gabbros from the margins of dikes at Expo and McKevitt have been dated, as well as a thick differentiated sill near Lac Vaillant. Wouter Bleecker has made a nice diagram showing that all of these ages, these fairly precise uranium-lead zircon ages, constrain this mafic and ultramafic magmatism that hosts mineralization to around 1882 to 1883 MA. So just based on the ages, it's hard to distinguish between the expo and the raglan style mineralization and units. Next, let's look quickly at the plumbing system architecture and the morphology of some of these bodies. So a couple different models might explain a relationship between the expo units and the raglan units. So one model is that the expo units directly feed the raglan units. So they have a similar source. And then another model is that the expo units do not directly feed into the raglan units. So they could still have a similar source, but they're not directly feeding, or they're not directly connected. So Wouter Bleecker likes the idea of the second model, where the expo blade-shaped dikes and chonoliths erupt at surface and then feed the raglan units, which are farther down flow. So we'll keep this in the back of our minds when we're moving through this presentation. So you can imagine that within a plumbing system like this, you'll have a variety of sills and dikes and lava flows. And these can be summarized or categorized as non-cumulate undifferentiated units, non-cumulate differentiated units, cumulate differentiated, and cumulate undifferentiated. So here the cumulate units have more olivine cumulate, and the differentiated units have differentiated into a more mafic and then a more ultramafic portion. So you can imagine differentiated sills might fit here, whereas high flow, very turbulent lava channels might fit in the bottom here. The importance of this diagram is that significant sulfide mineralization is only hosted in the cumulate units. This is a similar diagram showing the variations in olivine accumulation, so cumulates near the top, non-cumulates near the bottom, and differentiation, so well-differentiated units with a clear ultramafic and mafic portion to the right, and poorly differentiated units to the left. Once again, the mineral potential for disseminated, net textured, and massive sulfides is mostly within these cumulate units, which have little to no differentiation. The well-differentiated units can host reef-style disseminated mineralization. So this reef-style exists in the delta trend, but I'm not talking very much about that for this presentation. Most of the mineralization in the expo and raglan trends would be this in red here, these poorly differentiated cumulate units. So let's look briefly at the geometry of some of these bodies. So we'll zoom in on the Kehoe area. And an aerial view shows these two ultramafic dikes cross-cutting a basalt ridge here in the background. And near the keels, or near the bottoms of these dikes, is where the copper, nickel, PG sulfides are located. And then the trace of a formational conductor, this is a sulfidic unit, probably some iron formation. Let's also look at McKevitt, and it's a similar story here. McKevitt is a nice blade-shaped dike with gabbroic margins and ultramafic interior, mostly olivine proxenite. And the mineralization is also located near the keel of this unit. And we'll look at what's called south limb or boomerang, which is located just to the south of the Expo deposit. This unit has a very thin gabbroic top, so I'm interpreting that as the top. The rest of the unit is proxenite or olivine proxenite. So we can see some sharp undulatory contacts between olivine proxenite and proxenite near the base or even in the interior of the unit. Size grading of oikocrysts, and then that thin ferrogabbroic top. So I would interpret this as a more channelized sill. But we can also look at a well-differentiated sill that was less channelized in the NC20C area. So stratigraphic up is to the right here, and there's a thick gabbroic portion that's not shown on the image. Most of the image is the lower ultramafic portion. So within the ultramafic portion, we see a lot of olivine and pyroxene enclosing the olivine. And on the right, you can see the oikocrysts in a cut hand sample. At the center of the sill is a very sharp undulatory contact between the overlying proxenite or metallogabbro and the olivine proxenite immediately below it. In cut hand sample, there's normally a little bit of sulfide mineralization along this contact or located within alteration veins extending from it. And the geochemistry shows a very nice profile typical of a differentiated sill, where the lowermost ultramafic portion has higher MgO, higher nickel, and then the upper gabbroic portion, of course, has lower MgO, lower nickel contents. And there are small spikes in sulfide mineralization near that internal contact between the two lithologies. So the lowermost portion is an olivine orthocumulate, then a thick portion within the ultramafic part of olivine mesocumulate, a little bit of sulfide mineralization near that internal contact, and then a thick unit of variably textured gabbro near the top. Now let's look at Catnip. And this is work that Mike has done, looking at this thick ultramafic lava flow that sits immediately on top of a thinner gabbroic unit and sulfidic argillites. So we can see in the lower section where this ultramafic lava channel has cut down into the footwall gabbro, and in some places the sulfidic argillites. So there's the source of sulfur for the significant sulfide mineralization. So we can see the hornfels sediment at the very bottom of these lava channels in contact with proxenite, and the nickel copper sulfides that sit within these embayments. So let's look quickly at the whole rock lithogeochemistry and see if there's a difference between the Raglan style units, lava channels and lava flows that host mineralization, and the Expo style units, channelless and blade-shaped dikes that host mineralization. Well, just based on the major elements, it's difficult to see a difference. On the left is a diagram of titanium versus magnesium, and the Expo and Raglan units, shown in orange and red, follow similar trends. The trace elements give us a little more detail. So on the right, the Expo units appear less contaminated than the Raglan units. Note that the Raglan units are also more magnesium. So in an extended rare earth diagram, normalized to primitive mantle, once again, the Raglan units appear to be more contaminated than Expo. The Raglan units are also richer in olivine, so the heavy rare earth concentrations are a bit lower than the Expo units. Once again, a plot of thorium to ytterbium versus niobium to ytterbium shows a mixing trend between sediments and the mantle source, with the Raglan units apparently being more contaminated with sediments and having experienced more assimilation fractional crystallization than the Expo units. But it appears that they both have a similar depleted mantle source. Now we can look very briefly at the mineral chemistry, the olivine chemistry of these units. So this is work that we're doing right now. On these diagrams, the filled symbols are olivines that have been analyzed as part of this study. Olivine is highly incompatible in aluminum is highly incompatible in olivine, so it should be lower. And we see that with increasing forsterite content, the Raglan units have a little more olivine and more calcium. This is indicative of more assimilation fractional crystallization than the Expo units. The Expo units also have olivine with lower forsterite contents. So these are apparently lower temperature, less magnesian magmas. On the bottom, the plot of nickel against forsterite shows that some of the olivines that we've analyzed from Raglan have apparently been in contact with magma, which has lost some nickel to sulfides. So lower nickel at higher forsterite content indicates olivine and sulfide fractional crystallization, whereas this trend at the top indicates olivine only fractional crystallization. So in total for this project, we've collected around 700 samples, trying to cover most of the Raglan trend and the Expo trend. And we're currently analyzing about 123 of these samples for olivine chemistry. So some thin section scans of these sections, which are very hard to come by, so fresh olivine is hard to find in this area, show that at Raglan, these units are nice peridotites, olivine mesocumulates. However, the Expo units, the most magnesian Expo units, show more poikilotic textures of olivine peroxenite, so pyroxene oikochrys with olivine chatochrys. A couple more minutes here, we can look at sulfide and ore compositions between the Expo trend and Raglan trend. So a compilation of assay data shows that both Expo and Raglan mineralization has similar platinum and palladium concentrations at higher nickel content. So the richer ores have similar concentrations of platinum and palladium. There's a difference between nickel and cobalt, between Expo and Raglan. And some of this is likely due to different ratios of pyrrhotite and pentlandite. So maybe more pentlandite in most of the Raglan ores and less pentlandite in the Expo ores. A normative sulfide mineralogy of these sulfides at Expo and Raglan show that, as we've seen, the Expo units are a bit poorer in nickel or poorer in pentlandite.
Hey, Dylan, you got to wrap it up.
Yep, I think this is the last slide here. And then a compilation of the assay data also shows the significant difference in nickel to copper ratios between the expo ores and the expo ores on the right in blue and the raglan ores on the left in red. So going back to this idea where expo feeds raglan units, well, the raglan units have experienced more assimilation fractional crystallization and more contamination, but due to the higher magnesium contents, the raglan magmas appeared to have been hotter, and the sulfide metals also do not support this idea of expo feeding raglan. So work in progress is, as I mentioned, we're completing some olivine chemistry. During the winter, we'll do a little more whole rock trace element analyses and some PGE chemistry of the barren to poorly mineralized samples. And then I'm working on writing the thesis chapters and journal manuscripts.